Traveling into a distant future, getting an answer to the age-old question we have all, directly or indirectly, thought about. What will become of humanity? The inquiry is fascinating in and of itself, but today, with the doomsday clock striking 85 seconds to midnight, the closest we have ever been to what figuratively signifies the end of humanity, this question is ever more relevant. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist says, a year ago, we warned that the world was perilously close to global disaster and that any delay in reversing course increased the probability of catastrophe. Rather than heed this warning, Russia, China, the United States, and other major countries have instead become increasingly aggressive, adversarial, and nationalistic. Hard-won global understandings are collapsing, accelerating a winner-takes-all great power competition and undermining the international cooperation critical to reducing the risk of nuclear war. Climate change, the misuse of biotechnology, and the potential threat of artificial intelligence and other apocalyptic dangers. Certainly, our hopes for humanity are bleaker now than they were prior to the 20th century. In literature, utopian societies tend to quickly turn dystopian, and that is because of the human nature that we all know too well, that desire to control and conquer, even when it's to our own bane, even if perhaps in the process of controlling and conquering, we destroy ourselves. We see the darkness of the human heart not only in societies and nations, we see it in relationships, in family dynamics, corroding virtues that we also have as human beings. And how does this relate to the time machine? The classic speculative science fiction novella by H.G. Wells deals with a man who travels to the year 802-701 AD. The blurb on the back of this edition says the following: the time, 802-701 AD. The place, an earth, stranger than you can imagine. The people, a pretty childlike race, the Eloi, and their distant cousins, the Morlocks, disgusting, hairy creatures who live in caves. Enter the time traveler, who has hurtled almost 1,000,000 years into the future. After the Morlocks steal his machine, he may be trapped there and at their mercy. When the time traveler reaches this new time-space paradigm, he finds what initially seems a utopian society. The descendants of humans, the Eloi, are small, beautiful creatures that act much as children do, filled with happiness and play. A curiosity that may be there one moment and gone the next. Everything seems perfect until night comes and the Eloi start to act rather strangely. Page 55 and 56 say the following: it was from her, too, that I learned that fear had not yet left the world. She was fearless enough in the daylight, and she had the oddest confidence in me, for once, in a foolish moment, I made threatening grimaces at her, and she simply laughed at them. But she dreaded the dark, dreaded shadows, dreaded black things. Darkness to her was the one thing dreadful. It was a singularly passionate emotion, and it set me thinking and observing. I discovered then, among other things, that these little people gathered into the great houses after dark and slept in droves. To enter upon them without a light was to put them into a tumult of apprehension. I never found one out of doors, or one sleeping alone within doors after dark. Yet I was still such a blockhead that I missed the lesson of that fear, and in spite of Weena's distress, I insisted upon sleeping away from these slumbering multitudes. The dreadful thing lurking at night are the Morlocks, another race descending from humans. By contrast, this group that dwells in underground tunnel systems elicits disgust in the time traveler. They are described as pale, ape-like creatures with a hunch for violence. They are the creatures wreaking havoc at night. Their extreme sensitivity to light makes them nocturnal, providing the allegorical conflict of light versus darkness, and leads us to ponder which of these two paths will humanity follow. Page 73 and 74 say the following: The enemy I dreaded may surprise you. It was the darkness of the new moon. Weena had put this into my head by some at first incomprehensible remarks about the dark nights. It was not such a very difficult problem to guess what the coming dark nights might mean. The moon was on the wane. Each night there was a longer interval of darkness, and I now understood to some slight degree at least the reason of the fear of these little upper world people for the dark. I wondered vaguely what foul villainy it might be that the Morlocks did under the new moon. I felt pretty sure now that my second hypothesis was all wrong. The upper world people might once have been the favored aristocracy and the Morlocks their mechanical servants, but that had long since passed away. The two species that had resulted from the evolution of men were sliding down towards or had already arrived at an altogether new relationship. We must consider that H.G. Wells was an avant-garde socialist of his time, and through this dynamic of the Morlocks representing the evolution of the working class and the Eloi the upper class, we can interpret H.G. Wells meant a warning that the division of the classes will eventually lead to a dystopian society, something that humanity should try to avoid. I personally don't like that it should be the Morlocks, the working class, who evolved to be the evil descendants of humanity. It seems to me that evil, and this is only a personal opinion, that true evil seems to reside and will continue to reside primarily, but not exclusively, in the upper classes. But I think I understand what Wells was aiming for. But within this fight of light versus darkness, in which darkness seems to be winning, there are moments of hope. Take the following scene, for example, from page 53 and 54. That day, too, I made a friend, of a sort. It happened that as I was watching some of the little people bathing in a shallow, one of them was seized with cramp and began drifting downstream. The main current ran rather swiftly, but not too strongly for even a moderate swimmer. It will give you an idea, therefore, of the strange deficiency in these creatures when I tell you that none made the slightest attempt to rescue the weakly crying little thing which was drowning before their eyes. When I realized this, I hurriedly slipped off my clothes and, wading in at a point lower down, I caught the poor mite and drew her safe to land. A little rubbing of the limbs soon brought her round, and I had the satisfaction of seeing she was all right before I left her. I had got to such a low estimate of her kind that I did not expect any gratitude from her. In that, however, I was wrong. This happened in the morning. In the afternoon I met my little woman, as I believe it was, as I was returning towards my center from an exploration, and she received me with cries of delight and presented me with a big garland of flowers, evidently made for me, and me alone. The thing took my imagination. Very possibly I had been feeling desolate. At any rate, I did my best to display my appreciation of the gift. We were soon seated together in a little stone arbor, engaged in conversation, chiefly of smiles. The creature's friendliness affected me exactly as a child's might have done. We passed each other flowers, and she kissed my hands. I did the same to hers. Then I tried talk and found that her name was Weena, which, though I don't know what it meant, somehow seemed appropriate enough. That was the beginning of a queer friendship which lasted a week and ended, as I will tell you. There is a bit of a platonic love relationship between the time traveler and Weena, giving hope that tenderness and love are still possible, at least among the Eloi people, even in the year 802-701 AD. The outcome of their relationship is one of the reasons you may want to read the book through to the end. In terms of my review for the book, I mean, it's a classic, especially for people who are interested in science fiction. It's definitely worth the time to read. For those who are not big fans of science fictions like me, trust me when I say there is more to the book than the science fiction aspect. All great literature says something beyond the conventions of its genre, and this little book is a classic for a reason. Let us remember too that when this book was published, the concept of science fiction as a genre had not yet come to fruition, so the book was not bound by conventions, but rather laying down the ground where later and greater figures such as Ray Bradbury would walk upon. Although it isn't in my general area of interest, it was a fun, fairly easy to read book, easy, especially considering that it comes from the 1800s. Some common critiques of H.G. Wells deals with his having scenes with elements that seem suspiciously too convenient, such as the ending of the War of the Worlds. And I think there were instances like this in this book. For example, the time traveler finds a book of matches which he just happens to need in order to scare off the light-sensitive Morlocks. And to me, the notion that you would travel so far into the future and find a perfectly preserved archaic piece of technology from when humans roamed the earth did not seem plausible, even in speculative fiction. If you can get past these types of details, though, you'll find enough things that make it enjoyable, for it has elements of storytelling that make it engaging. It reads as a horror, as a thriller, definitely filled with suspense, that feeling we love so much in storytelling. The story of the time traveler is told by himself, but not directly to us, the readers, but rather to an elite group of people who are there to inquire about his time machine. To them, he says, "I can't argue tonight. I don't mind telling you the story, but I can't argue. I will," he went on, "tell you the story of what has happened to me, if you like, but you must refrain from interruption. I want to tell it badly. Most of it will sound like lying, so be it. It's true, every word of it all the same. I was in my laboratory at 4 o'clock, and since then, I've lived 8 days. Such days as no human being ever lived before. I'm nearly worn out, but I shan't sleep till I've told this thing over to you. Then I shall go to bed. But no interruption. Is it agreed?" So there are several layers to this narrative. Obviously, we have the author, and then we have a narrator telling the story of the time traveler, and finally, we have the time traveler as the narrator of his time travel adventures. I enjoy this type of narrations, especially when the secondary narrator, in this case the time traveler, leave it up to his audience in the book, in this case that elite group of men, to believe what they hear or not, because it truly is a way for the real reader to receive the story as if from hearsay, thereby lending it the power to attain its own mythos, even though we obviously know it's fiction. I really enjoy this type of technique when authors use it. My biggest interest in the story is what this imaginative author, born in the 19th century, saw for the future of humanity. Nowadays, with the doomsday clock ticking, when we think of the question, what will become of humanity, our collective consciousness summons images of nuclear catastrophe and the total annihilation of our species. But I like to anchor back, and further back, to a time when our collective consciousness could have imagined that, even in 1,000,000 years, tenderness and love were still possible.